So one of the problems with living today is your spouse watches YouTube. Yeah, and they're like, "What are you watching right now?" No, that's actually my wife saying that to me, not me to her. But I was watching Scandinavian herding calls. So I don't know if we have any Swedish people. Do we have some Swedish people? Here we go. Look at the Swedes are raising their hands. But this was in Sweden. It's called, and I don't speak Swedish, obviously, but it's Kalning. But it's almost haunting. It's sort of these peasant folk singing to herd animals. They bring in cows, they bring in sheep, and they actually spend time on these Swedish summer farms singing to animals, and they herd them by their voice. Now, of course, I was using this for research purposes because today is Good Shepherd Sunday, and one of the things that Jesus tells us is that his sheep will recognize his voice. And it's one thing to imagine that Jesus might be speaking over us. It's another thing to imagine that Jesus calls us with singing. So you can go down that YouTube rabbit hole if you want and watch the Swedish farmers sing. But it's just a reminder that the shepherding image that Jesus uses for today is very intimate and personal. There was just a news article about the depersonalization of work. That people were having, like if you were an Uber driver, your boss is an algorithm. Like there's no one you can call. They just say, if you want this fare, we'll pay you this much, and they base that on how much they think you'll work for. And so there's no one you can talk to and say, hey, this doesn't seem fair, or I want to talk to someone, because a computer is running the relationship. And it's a reminder that when we're talking about the life of faith, we're not talking about something that's depersonalized. God is not using an algorithm to deal with you and just plugging the numbers and saying, well, we put the numbers in and that's what it is. There's nothing I can do about it. It is a very personal and individualized herding of many individuals into a flock. So a successful shepherd is able to individually know the sheep by name. So when Rowan's baptized, he's not going to get a number. We're going to say his name. Rowan, you're the one that God is folding into this promise of baptism. So in a world that is constantly moving maybe more toward depersonalization, one of the ways of radical Christian living is to push in the other way of kind of an encouraging of a sort of personalism and a sort of personal intimacy, a real connecting, a genuine connecting with people, because it's something innate in us. It's something within us that's responding. That's why Jesus doesn't say, and then you will go to lots of classes and you will learn about me, and then once you've learned about me, you'll be ready to follow me, but not very well. But after a few more certifications, then you'll be ready to be my disciple. He just says, you'll hear my voice and you'll know that you belong to me. It's so simple and it's so beautiful because it's a relationship. It's not a set of skills that are necessary to become successful or faithful. Now, we do want to talk about this image, and the church uses this every year on the fourth Sunday of Easter. Why is the image of the shepherd so foundational? You'll notice that Jesus talks about this, and then it says, after Jesus described this to the people, they didn't understand what he was saying. So if anyone needed to confirm that, in fact, we are sort of hard-headed sheep, he literally tells us this is what it is, and then everyone just goes, I wonder what that means. Like, what is he saying to us? And then Jesus goes, okay, well, let me tell you, I am this and you are this, and this is what this means. But the last statement that Jesus had in the gospel is an important reminder for us. I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. So the one who sings to us, the one who calls us into this intimacy, is not someone who's calling us to the slaughterhouse. This is not someone who goes, well, they don't know where they're going, but, we've got to put meat on the table. This is someone who genuinely loves the sheep and is leading us toward a place of abundant life. And the reason that's important is the sheep live in a dangerous world. And the sheep live in a world full of many different voices. And you'll even hear that when Jesus talks about herding the sheep, he says, my sheep will recognize my voice. Now, we'll talk a bit about the different kinds of sheepfolds that they had in the time of Jesus, and even in some places they still have. But it's an important question for each of you to think on a spiritual level, or maybe not even a spiritual level, what are the voices that are the guiding voices of your life? Now, we could say on a psychological level, many of us have the voice of a parent or an adult that we grew up with that's still sort of ringing in our head. Sometimes that's positive, sometimes that's negative. Sometimes you hear a voice of critique, sometimes you hear a voice of love. We have the voice that we talk to ourselves, our own self-voice, the voice that we go, come on, you can do it, I believe in you. If no one else does, I believe in you. And that voice can be halting, or that voice can be encouraging or discouraging. And then, we live in this world that's flooded with different influences and influencers, and each of us probably has our own very baroque menu of media voices that we trust and listen to, and those guide us in our opinions about politics, social situations, and the world in which we live. So this is a world that is very loud. It is a world with many competing voices, and if nothing else, you should take an inventory and say, who are the voices I listen to? And how do these voices square with this call to life abundant? Now, Jesus lets us know that he's not going to be the only one showing up at the sheepfold. This is why it's important. Jesus lets us know that the reason there is a sheepfold is there's danger for sheep, whether it's walking through the valley of the shadow of death, whether it's eating a meal in the presence of enemies. There were really two different kinds of sheepfolds, and we're going to split the difference on this because he doesn't say which one he's talking about. There were sort of like urban sheepfolds, and then there were rural sheepfolds. Obviously, the urban ones, it's his baptism, he can do what he wants, but the urban sheepfolds, obviously, were on we're not talking about like Los Angeles, it's not like going to the Tokyo fish market or something, but they were larger enclosures where many shepherds would mix their sheep. So you would have this large four-sided building without a roof, but on top of the walls you would have probably thorn bushes or something, their version of barbed wire, so that people weren't climbing over. And all these sheep would be mixed together, and then you would have a doorkeeper. That's why Jesus talks about that. See, the word for gate and door is the same, so you could go either way, but in this case they had a door, and then the doorkeeper knew all the shepherds, and then the shepherds knew all the sheep. And this is an important part of that voice identification process that I described, is you need to make sure that you're letting the right people in. If the sheep are all kind of in this enclosure, you only want shepherds in there. You don't want people in there who don't belong. And so the doorkeeper knows the voice of the shepherd, and then the sheep know the voice of the shepherd as well. But Jesus talks about two different groups of people. He talks about bandits and thieves. And it could be that he just is describing sort of a doublet. But I think bandits and thieves, at least in the words that he's using, give us two different kinds of danger we can consider in a world where sheep are vulnerable. So the first, the bandits, are people who try and create trouble through stealth, through silence, through secrecy. And this is an important part, people who are sort of subtly sneaking into the sheepfold, and they're creating strife, but very quietly, stealthily. They don't want to draw attention to themselves. And it's a reminder that in a world of many loud voices, we also have to be aware of those who are asking us to keep secrets. You can think about this. You can think about the church's own history or own recent history across the various denominations related to child sexual abuse in the churches. They're created a culture of secrecy, a culture of we shouldn't talk about that, a culture of, it's who's blaming people and kind of putting things under and using the language of forgiveness to hide. Jesus warns us against a culture of secrecy that does not lead to abundant life for sheep. So that's a warning he offers. Beware of this sort of stealthiness that will not lead to abundant life, but will lead to the destruction of sheep lives. So that's one. And then the second one, that bandits are very much similar to Barabbas. These are people who create trouble through violence. And so you can think about this sort of double-pronged warning that Jesus offers. One is kind of a culture of secrecy and a culture of stealth. One is a culture of violence. And in both cases, the sheep are injured and hurt. And Jesus says, that's not from me. This is very important that you understand this, that the voice of the Good Shepherd will never ask you to keep bad secrets, and the voice of the shepherd will never lead you to violence against other sheep. If you hear those voices and you follow those voices, as Jesus says, that's not me. They may be in the sheepfold, they may be doing stuff to the sheep, but that's not from me. I'm the Good Shepherd. He's the one singing to us. He's the one who's leading us to life abundant. Jesus lifts this up in the text, I think, very clearly. And you can think all through his own ministry that he tells people, I'm doing nothing in secret. This is an important part of Christianity that I think this Sunday is helpful to remind everyone about. Christianity does not have secret knowledge. We are not a religion that inducts people into growing secrecy, the higher level. What level are you? And now we can tell you what this is really about. From the very beginning, the things we teach to children are the things you spend your whole life growing into and understanding, namely the good news that Jesus came not to condemn the world, but to save it, that Jesus came that we might have life and have it abundantly. And there's not going to be any kind of bait and switch later on, going, well, I know we got you in with that good news stuff, but now here's what he's really going to do, and it's not good. It's going to be bad, and a lot of people are going to be hurt, but it's their fault. There's a tendency in, especially when religion becomes fearful or living during anxious times, and we're living in a growing time of anxiety, that the message of God can become either a message of developing secret knowledge or a message of growing violence, a kind of necessary violence. And Jesus tells us clearly on this Good Shepherd Sunday, you will go all the way down to the heart of the gospel, and you'll still see the same thing. You will see the face of Jesus. You will see the message of resurrection. You will go to the heart of the Father, and you will see the same thing. You will see Jesus hanging on a cross, saying, Father, forgive them, and you will see the Father forgiving. That's it. Our religion is very open. Our religion is very out there. And that's why Jesus, when he's called before Pontius Pilate, says, I never did any of this in secret. You can ask anyone who heard me, and they'll tell you what I said. Literally, it's all out there. It's all in the public record. I have nothing to hide. And you'll remember the reaction to that is he gets slapped across the face. So someone reacts with a different voice and a different proposal, which is a smack across the face saying, how dare you talk to him like that? Don't you know who he is? It's like, well, don't you know who he is? And of course they don't, and that's part of the problem. What Jesus tells us is, he'll come in, and this is another thing I want to lift up, he'll come into this sort of urban sheepfold, and there will be all sorts of sheep. And think about the world in which we live. The world is mixed up with all sorts of different people. And it can be very difficult for us sometimes to know, well, where do I belong, or to what story do I belong, to what voice do I really belong? And we probably belong to different groups and people. And the people who lived in the sheepfold did not separate the sheep. They didn't bother separating the sheep. They were all mixed together. And if you think about the world in which we live, everyone's just mixed together, and we're constantly crossing paths with people. And the reason they didn't separate the sheep is they knew that when the sheep heard their shepherd's voice, they would start following. The sheep would self-select to follow in this way. And so part of you doing an inventory of the voices that you're listening to and the voices that you're following is also to realize that part of what we're trying to do spiritually is grow in attunement to the voice of the Good Shepherd so that when he calls, we'll go. There's no separation that happens like, well, I don't know, is that yours? I don't know, they look the same. They're sheep. I don't know which one's which. They both look the same. There's no necessary separation because the sheep will listen to the voice, and then the shepherd will know his sheep, and he says, I will lead them out. I will go in front of them. And this is the adventure of your Christian life, that you will go with Christ as he leads you, and there's no place that Jesus will call you that he hasn't gone first, including to the cross and the resurrection. He's already gone there for us. And so when we go there ourselves, we will hear a voice singing to us. We will hear a shepherd calling us. There may be a hand on your face touching the familiar features of who you are. And Jesus will lead us in the place that we were called to go. The whole point of this Good Shepherd Sunday is to remind you that in a noisy world with many voices, in a world where there are many sheep who are constantly causing, and we're not sure necessarily where everyone belongs, we have a story that makes sense of our lives. We have a promise that make sense of our lives. And there is someone who loves us, who is calling us, and who came for one reason, for life abundant. And he didn't say, I came for life abundant, asterisk, except in the following circumstances, you cannot have abundant life. Jesus came for a very simple and wonderful reason. And so I hope that you hear the shepherd's voice, and I hope you will enjoy the abundant life that's been secured for you through the resurrection of Christ. Amen.